Um, might I, might I go home? Winet asked, her eyes pleading with the two individuals before her. Captain Jacob and the harpy exchanged a look out of the corner of their eyes. At first they seemed accusatory, then each seemed to demand the other respond. If Winet didn't know any better, she might have thought the two were conversing telepathically. However, with beings capable of such expressive body language as these two species, it was more likely they were letting their bodies do the talking instead. At length, Captain Jacob let out a sigh. "Well, Missy, the thing there is—" "How are you doing?" Jacob asked as he set down a mug of hot liquid in front of Winet. The young Ulcerian stared blankly at the far wall as she absent-mindedly picked up the mug, feeling the warmth of its contents on her hands through the ceramic container, then unconsciously brought it to her mouth and took a sip. Suddenly, her taste buds were assaulted with a rich, sweet taste. "Oh, this is good," she responded robotically. Jacob hadn't been talking about the cocoa, but figured he'd take the win as he sat down across from her with a sigh, letting the girl process her thoughts. And there was a lot to process there. Her family wanted her dead, so that should have caused no small amount of grief, but the reason was just so. If her father wanted her dead because he was looking at a picture of her when he stubbed his toe, that would have made more sense. At first Jacob thought it was a cultural thing, something to do with chicken bones or bad dreams or whatever other superstitions they might have, that somehow made sense to their people. However, Winet seemed to believe everything he said had been a joke, until he had shown her a recording of when he had accepted the contract. And since then she had been, well, apparently it didn't make any sense to her either. After a very long, very awkward silence, Winet finally spoke up. "So this whole pirate thing, would I have to be your mate if I joined your crew?" Jacob opened his mouth to speak, thought better of it, then closed it. He then opened his mouth to speak again thought better of it, and closed it again. Winet felt the corner of her mouth curl into an ever-so-subtle grin at that. "How's it look, Cobb?" Gildigast asked the harpy as he came from the hallway. Halkandiakan Alkulena looked behind him at the mess hall that the captain had entered with the Ulcerian girl some time ago, though barely a sound had come from there since he had explained everything to her. "How do you think, you oaf?" he shot back. Technically speaking, Gildigast outranked Halkandiakan Alkulena. At least the crew had voted for the overgrown frog to be the first mate, rather than the harpy. Halkandiakan Alkulena couldn't comprehend why, though it did have some advantages. Namely, without any actual operations authority, it left him free to actually get shit done. Especially since neither the captain nor first mate seemed to have the foggiest clue what they were doing most of the time. Take the captain's decision to renege on the contract, for example. Oh, sure. Halkandiakan Alkulena had known he was going to the moment he had accepted the contract. He could tell from the man's body language that every word and pleasantry that escaped his lips was a lie, and the harpy didn't necessarily blame him for that. It would have left a bad taste in his mouth if they actually killed the Ulcerian girl for such nonsense, but the captain could have just turned it down. But oh no, instead he accepted it, just to make sure no one else took it. There would eventually be some repercussions for that. Well, there would be some attempts. Though, given the quite frankly ludicrously bleeding edge, military-grade technology that the captain had somehow acquired and incorporated into the vessel, Halkandiakan Alkulena would have thought he was part of some clandestine military unit if not for literally everything else about Jacob. The likelihood of any of those attempts being successful was remote. Still, they'd be a nuisance if nothing else. Halkandiakan Alkulena felt a headache coming on as he put a feathered palm to his forehead. "Just get us out of here for now, before any patrols start coming through." Gildigast nodded. "As you say, Cobb," he replied before walking off to the bridge. There it was again. Cobb. Apparently it was short for chief of the boat or something, a military rank of some sort or another. In a way it was fitting, he supposed. They were the furthest thing from a military crew you could get. Even the military wasn't this dysfunctional. But Halkandiakan Alkulena did feel like he was the central cog that allowed the ship to function. The issue was how everyone used that instead of his actual name. Though, given the way that Captain Jacob kept mispronouncing it and calling him gambling junkie instead, maybe that was for the best. The captain had done that so often that Cobb half wondered if it was intentional. though he felt that such a belief was likely assigning a level of cleverness to the captain that he didn't possess, if his attitude and choice of attire were anything to go by. Regardless, calling him Cobb had become so commonplace on the ship that even he began using it instead of his actual name. Hell, he'd even started to use it when he first introduced himself to their newest guest. He had already compromised on calling his people harpies, which to his mind wasn't much of a compromise, and the fact that in human myths they were man-eating monsters only made him feel better about it. But forgetting his own name was going too far. "Just what in the hells is he doing now?" Cobb growled angrily as he entered the cargo hold, the sound of metal clashing against metal echoing loudly as Gerson stood watch near the entrance. "Oh, I think he called it fencing, though losing would be the more appropriate term." The vaguely feline Yulnan chuckled. As if on cue, Captain Jacob let out a yelp as he hopped up and down, shaking his hand energetically as though trying to wave away the pain. Cobb took a moment to absorb the scene in front of him, his eyes slowly transitioning from annoyed to dumbstruck. He then closed said eyes and took a deep breath, letting it out slowly before opening them again. "Why?" he demanded in as calm of a tone as he could possibly muster. Gerson shrugged. "Cap said if she wants to be a pirate, she needs to learn how to fight with a sword." That... Cobb wanted to protest the absurdity of it, but as the captain and the Ulcerian girl squared off again, he realized there wasn't much point. Sounds like something he'd say. His shoulders sagged, and he prepared to turn to walk away. "Wait! Wait!" Gerson insisted in a high whisper, grabbing Cobb by the shoulder to try to turn him around. Cobb would rather watch entropy unfold than this nonsense, but for some reason the young man seemed very eager for him to see it. "All right, begin," Captain Jacob called out. There was an attempt, a very bad attempt on his part, to strike at the girl who was nearly half his size with his improvised training sword. It went as well as one might expect from a complete amateur, and wasn't terribly amusing. The way that small girl quickly parried the attack, closed the distance, stomped on his foot, elbowed him in the gut, then slapped him hard on the arm with her own improvised training sword, however, was something that Cobb never knew he needed in life, but desperately wanted more of. "I didn't know the Ulcerians had such a tradition among their people," Cobb mused aloud. "They don't," Gerson said with a wide smile on his face as he leaned closer to the harpy. "She just watched some videos and read some manuals. Apparently she understood them easily enough. Better than Cap, at least." "Your own people do have such a tradition, don't they?" Cobb asked, curious as to exactly how well the girl was really doing. Gerson nodded. "Yeah, she's a natural talent by our standards. With some real training she'd definitely shine. Though right now, well, at that moment, the girl accidentally overcommitted to her attack, practically bowling over into Jacob. As the latter had already been off balance, both of them tumbled to the floor with a loud clang. It was followed by a high-pitched, startled yelp from Jacob, as the girl's knee had come precariously close to his precious cargo during the fall. "She's excellent for a newbie, but she's got a ways to go before she's truly good," Gerson finished. Cobb nodded, seeing the man's point, then leaned closer to him and whispered softly, "You're recording this, right?" "Oh yeah," the Yulnan grinned broadly.